today, the title of today's discussion is Your Ego is Not Your Amigo. And I'll give you background that I've been in business for 43 years, self-employed. And my primary background is as a financial counselor, as a lawyer, helping business owners and businesses that are in trouble. All right, number one, we all know we need an ego. We need strong self-confidence to get through life. The question is, when do we cross that line where it becomes destructive and doesn't help our interests? And for many people, ourselves, we've all had the experience where we cross that line and then we find out too late we should kind of bring it back. And I'll give you examples. When we have our ego that's out of control, and what I mean by that ego is your self-confidence. You think you're better than you really are. Here are some of the things that are good examples. Image. A lot of us, well, we all want to project a certain image in life. And I'll give an example from my years of work. I've worked on about 5,000 insolvency matters, bankruptcies, workouts in the 42, 43 years, either as a trustee in bankruptcy or as a business consultant, if you want to call it that. And I've helped a lot of people work them off the ledge. Most made it off the ledge, but not everyone does. Just last week, I had a young lady in my office. She's paying $1,450 a month for her car payment for a Tesla. But she and her husband live in a mobile home out in Olala with 3 kids. Is there some imbalance here? And then they're seeing me about financial problems. And she became hostile when I explained to her that, you know, you're going to have to let this car go back and maybe buy something modest, like the regular, what you and I would pay $300, $400, $500 a month for a car. Again, that's the case where her ego, her need for this image was way out of whack with reality, and it was hurting her and her husband in their financial world. And this is the sort of stuff I see daily in my business. Another example would be, I have a lot of clients that have house payments that are $3,500, $4,200, up to $5,000 a month. And they live over in, well, some people live in Canterwood, if you know where that is. It's a golf course in Gig Harbor. And they're living a lie. This is what happens when we let our ego, our self-image get way out of control. And I've got to admit, in the past, I might have done that a few times, especially when I was single on a date, but that's a different story. And I was quickly found out, as we all are when we don't live with congruency and within our means. My wife, her secular Bible is a book called The Millionaire Next Door. Some of you may have read it or heard of it. And the number one common trait of an American millionaire, do you know what it is? Anyone have any idea? Tom?
Fear.
No.
Fear.
No. Travis. Well, frugality, right. But the number one trait or example is they all have and drive used pickup trucks.
F-150s.
Warren Buffett.
Right. You know, and the point being, they don't have a need to show it off. In fact, you get to a point in life, you want to be under the radar. You don't want people to know, because why? If this is the perversity of human nature that we all have a type of perversity in our lives. If you're, quote, too successful, people think ill of you. They're jealous. They don't like it. They begrudge you. So you're better off you want to low-key it as best as possible. That's been my experience. Not that I've ever been at Bill Gates level, or ever will be. Another example, when it comes to business, I'm trying to tie in this out-of-control ego and not being your friend, your amigo, with business, because that's what I know is business. I know a lot of fellows that come to my office, and some women, that have a business. And they felt like, well, maybe I'm a realtor, so I got to hire people. Or maybe I'm a roofer. They build an empire. More employees, it makes them feel better. For example, a tragic one is, a fellow in town had built up a oil products company in the Tacoma area over the last 40 years. Then he became ill, so he had to leave, and they brought in a new CEO, but someone who hadn't paid their dues. First thing that new CEO did was start hiring all these administrative people and creating new divisions. They really didn't need it, and the company soon tanked. And that company had sales here in Tacoma of over $100 million a year, and now they're out of business. And it took them about 2.5, 3 years to slowly bleed. They finally brought in the old fellow who's retired and ill, but he couldn't save it. So again, when you have empire builders, and we all know people in our regular daily lives that feel like they're not important enough unless they can boss people around or build an organization around them. because they're afraid of doing the hard work themselves. They kind of want someone else to do the real work, insulate them from reality. Now, let's talk about some of the problems we have with an ego that's not in check. Number one, what's the number one problem any business owner has in America, probably the world? The number one problem in any business owner? Employees. It never changes, and it never will change because we're humans. And we all have a certain tendency to say, gee, when can I get my vacation? I know I've only been here 3 weeks, but I need to take a draw. My mom died last week for the third time, and I need to take 3 days off. I'm exaggerating there, but my point is, employees are always going to be the toughest thing because we're human beings, and we're all different shapes and sizes, and we all have different needs. And let's face it, we don't start from the same base. We know that from my experience, from talking to business owners over the years, to get one good employee, you're going to go through 3 to 5. They'll just wash out. They don't have what it takes. They won't meet your needs. They're not willing to work. They don't know how to work, or at least work in an effective, productive way. Yes, Kurt?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Or make a comment? And the other side of the coin on that, when you do find that one employee, so oftentimes you fail to adequately nourish them, pay them, promote them. You start to take them for granted.
Actually,
They're usually very loyal.
Right. Actually, but I'll tell you, I say it's almost like an oxymoron. If the employee is really good, eventually they will leave because they realize they can do as well or better on their own. And so if you go into the relationship accepting that, and I've learned that over the years. I've mentored a lot of young lawyers, and at first I was resentful. Oh, they left me. They're not lawyers. Then I realized, no, that's the nature of the human being. If they really are good, you know they're going to go away. But then you've developed a nice network, and in the long run, it pays off. If not in financial terms, you're making a better world. And I've learned the hard way that in the long run, it is about relationships. When I was a young man, and it's true of all of us when we're men, especially as younger, one of the problems we have in life is that we value, when you're in 3rd and 5th grade, accomplishments. Who's the fastest? Who can throw the dirt bomb the farthest? Who can fight each other? Whereas the girls our age, they're working on their friendships, which we think, because we want to be the best, whatever that achievement may be. And then later on in life, that helps create the problems when you first start dating and maybe get married. You wonder, why is there such a disconnect? Why doesn't she get me? Or, maybe it's because we're not getting them. And it takes a long time to figure that out. Now, Travis is an expert, a world traveler. He knows that. Yes. All right.
Well, what do you see? That's an interesting dynamic, especially with so many women in the workforce nowadays,
yeah.
And the different approach they bring to a lot of decision making and working together with people and stuff like that. Sometimes us older guys, we struggle with that because we don't want to get too discuss this thing too much. It's just go out and do it kind of stuff.
Sometimes.
But in the military, your firsthand experience, so many women in the military now. What kind of issues did that surface as he's retiring to, or is the fact that there's so much discipline that it really didn't surface that much?
I mean, it's definitely there.
Yeah.
And there's definitely some problems, like some big problems. There's that culture in the military of, to Noel's point about good employees, we were talking about this in the last class this week. Because of the way because of the way my leadership treated me, that's the reason why I left the military. The huge reason, because they just treated me like
Well, it's very hierarchical,
right.
And we know that the trend now is to not be vertical, but to be horizontal, more collaborative.
Right.
And I've had to learn and to adjust, and actually I'm enjoying it that way. I like it much better that way than the old ways. Being told that's the way you do it, and you're thinking, I don't think so, but I don't have any input. So you don't buy into it, so you're less effective. And when you and I are resentful, we don't do as well. And we end up sabotaging ourselves, sabotaging our job, and sabotaging everything. And that doesn't work in the long run.
But I would like to make an observation also, as it goes right back to your ego. And organizations where the leadership is actually confident in what they can do, but not stepping the line, it significantly brings everybody up. Where the leader, he's the leader by position, what happens in the military oftentimes, but half his staff knows the job much better than him, it implodes. People start getting dissatisfied, they start asking for transfers and start leaving.
Another way I would put that is, if you're a leader or one of the leaders, the people you're trying to lead, they can tell if you know what you're doing. And people smell BS in a hurry. And once you lose that, your command is done. It's just a matter of time. They'll just dissipate, go away, or you'll lose your business. Now, the other thing is coming about ego. Everyone, or not everyone, a lot of people, other than some people that are in the business analytics, I suggest, want to have their own business, right? And again, this is part of the human conceit, and this is a good thing. We all have to have a certain amount of conceit, or we would never try. And I see this a lot where somebody will buy a business. They'll never say this out loud, but what they're really saying is, oh, I can do a lot better than that last guy. I can hardly wait to get by that restaurant or that roofing company or whatever it is. But many times they're in my office 6 months or 2 years later because guess what? They're broke. They've lost all their money. In that case, that's where their ego was way out of control. They didn't understand what they were doing. I'll give you another example. There's a fellow who had a restaurant in Olympia for many years, long established, been in the family for decades. And he was on his second or third wife. And she wanted to have her own business. Could he say no to her? Heck no. So he goes out and helps her buy this business. And that business keeps consuming more and more money. And pretty soon, he's feeding the money that he has and should be using to keep his own business going into that. And her business went under, and then he had to sell his business at a loss. Again, it talks about when you and I want to have our strong ego, our sense of self-worth and confidence, how do we keep it in check? What are some of the things? Now, this is, again, my personal experience. Number one, your family, your spouse, your brothers or sisters, or if you have any partners or people you consider worthy of your peers, someone you'll actually listen to, Travis, right? There are people that give you advice, but there's only a few you really listen to because you think they know what they're doing and they have your interests at heart. I'll give you an example. This is why you want to be able, this is the way I try to, I don't have to try, it happens to me, it happens to Tom. I might win a big case in court, but when I come home that night, my wife will say, why did you take the trash out this morning? It's like, talk about deflation, but then you realize, oh yeah, there's still another life out there. Or your kids will say, hey, you were late to my meet. Because now we're getting into what is important with our ego. Balance. How do we achieve balance in life? And that is so difficult. I'm constantly fighting with it, and I know you do too, because it doesn't do us much good. Kirk, you've been in the finance business for 30
years.
Was it 47 years?
No, 30 years.
Oh, 30 years. Okay, yeah. But my point is, if you spend all your energy, if you spend, if you don't save some life and love for your life, for your own personal life and your family, you're going to end up alone, addicted to some substance, bitter, and probably not effective. And effective means you're not effective in your business, you'll probably end up losing that. So this is an issue that by having balance in your life, it'll keep your ego in check. And I mean business balance from your personal life. We all need that. Travis, what do you have that balances you, that keeps you from getting too big for your britches?
I think, honestly, a really good check for me is doing Mental Toughness Mondays. Because when I'm opening my mouth and saying things to everybody, like my product's me. And so if I'm not consistent with the things that come out of my mouth, it's just not gonna. So really, like, the people, like guys like Nick and Avery and Tom, who come on a regular basis, kind of keep me, they hold me to that philosophy, to an extent.
Yeah. Well, you're a young guy. What keeps you in check?
Just in terms of like keeping my ego down
Right.
to size. This depends where it's at, but I don't know. I think I have like a small, like an undersized image of myself. So I always feel like I should be like reading something or going like mental toughness Mondays or trying to develop some kind of skill in order to compensate for that. So I think it's more like an attempt at expansion more than an attempt at
Gotcha.
compression.
So yours hasn't gotten out of shape or out of hand.
Well, I almost feel like mine is like.
So you're building
I
it.
mean,
You're getting more confidence.
well, yeah, I've tried to and develop skills in order to do that.
Right.
So,
So no, I don't know how to ask this question, but I think it's in line of when, from your professional experience, what is that cliff that really made that individual have that aha moment and say, I'm not as good as I think I am?
Well,
You know, because I what keeps me in check is like, I know it, everything I do can be taken away immediately, and I'll be back at square one.
well, you are well grounded. One of the problems we all know from our own life, and it's people you see, and there's well-known people out there in the public life we can say this about, they lack the ability to have insight, meaning as they're getting feedback, when we meet somebody, when you're talking to somebody, you're getting social cues all the time. You like to think your mom and dad and your background, you learned how to read them. Am I offending that person? Are they listening to me? Am I boring them, right? Well, there are people out there that just don't pick that up when it comes to, let's take it into the business world. And so that aha moment, Tom, if somebody has really good insight about themselves and getting feedback in their business, they'll never see me. I see the people that wait too long, or they never see it. Just for example, last Tuesday, in my business, foreclosures occur in the state of Washington ordinarily on Fridays. It takes at least 4 months for a foreclosure to start from beginning to end. Well, they're not going to foreclose because you're a month late. They might be 6 months to a year. So somebody has missed their payments usually for a good half year to a year before the foreclosure gets going, let alone the 4 more months for it to happen. Well, I had a guy come see me last Tuesday. His house was being foreclosed on Friday. Now, he hadn't paid a payment for 8, 10, 12 months. But he was in denial, paralyzed emotionally, right? He just couldn't. That aha moment was finally, Tom, when he finally was ready to go nuts. And then he comes blowing into my office 3 days before the foreclosure. So that's what I deal with mainly. If people could quickly, early on, kind of like the Titanic, once you hit the iceberg, you got to know, get off the ship right away instead of waiting 2 hours when it's too late. Well, it all comes down to your ability to have insight, accurate insight about how you're being perceived, what signals you're sending, and how well you're getting along with your customers, your employees, and things like that. So there is no one. Tom, you're really, you come from a tough background, so you're really tough on yourself. So you'll quickly get insight that something's not working. A lot of other people who didn't develop their insight right or have, I'm not sure what the reason is, they just don't get it or they wait till it's too late. And that's what I get in. Yes, Travis.
To piggyback on that, no, because a lot of these guys know that I gave up a car for repossession when back after college when I quit engineering and whatnot.
How many months were you down? 3?
Not even that. I think
2?
I don't even think I was down 1. I think I knew that I didn't have the money and wasn't going to make the money.
Oh.
And so I was just like, it's time to give it up. And one of the things that I dealt with from people was a lot of people wanted me to hold on to it for a while. And the big thing I realized was, this cash problem isn't going to be solved by me borrowing more money or me like scrambling and running around. Let me just surrender the car. One, because I told the people that I'd pay for it, I'm not paying for it. And 2, it would begin to start another process. But to your point about like the insights, I think for me, because everybody else was saying hold on to it. And I was like, no, I can't pay for it. And I think the thing that got me there was dealing with, as a kid growing up, dealing with a lot of bullying and teasing. You're kind of always aware of your insufficiencies and you're always kind of assessing your insufficiencies. And so in that moment, it was just like, I very easily could deal with the truth of it. Like, I don't make enough money and I gotta give it up. And so it was not like I guess it wasn't a harsh thing to me to just deal with that reality of my own.
So in a way, having a tougher childhood makes you better in the long run. Because we all know people with a sense of entitlement, children of wealthy people who don't teach their kids how to really take care of life, they don't do well in life. And they can't handle disappointment or make the decisions that they should be making. All right, now I want to talk about, again, with your ego is not your amigo. My experience, there's two big myths about owning a business in America. And does anyone here want to guess what those two myths would be? John?
You get rich.
Right. People think you have more money than you do. Even if your business is grossing $1 million a month or $100,000 a month, it doesn't mean you're making the money. But to someone who's never run a business, they confuse gross income or gross revenues with profit. And even if you're making a profit, you have to pour it back into the business. You have to build a reserve. Now, as you get older, the second myth, this is the one that's really hard on me, and as you guys get older, you'll get it, and that is people think you have more time than you do. It's like, I just turn on a button or a switch and the cash machine will go. The business owns you in this respect, and this is the hard part where you want to get balance in your life. You're constantly thinking in your mind. You're juggling. When you run a business, you're a juggler. That's all you are. You have to get the new business in. You got to get the old product out on time. You got to make sure the cash flow works. You got to take care of all the employee problems. And there's always problems. There's always an emergency. So you become a good firefighter, putting out fires, while maintaining discipline with the organization. So those are the two toughest things. So what does that lead to? When you own a business, it's the relentlessness of the business that is hard to deal with over time. The initial blush, kind of like when you first get married or first date. Then later on, it's a grind. You got to work at it. It doesn't happen overnight. Well, in business, I find that what brings some businesses down that start out initially well is people get involved and they don't realize how hard it is. A good example is I probably file 3 to 5 bankruptcies a year for people that buy franchises. And guess what? They pay, it's not a lot, 35, 40, 50 grand, but then you have to pay a percentage every month back to the franchisor. And what they don't realize is the franchisor then requires you to buy all the products you need through them, so they get a markup and make money on it. I'm okay with that. But what that new owner doesn't realize is it's hard. Just because I buy a Subway franchise doesn't mean I'm going to make money. Or it's going to be, I only make 25 or 30 grand that year profit because I had to spend 50 hours a week in the shop. Again, it comes down to the business is relentless. At the same time, you don't want to work so hard that you become a shell, a husk, and that you don't stay married, that you don't even enjoy life. And pretty soon, I get so many people in my office, they're dead inside. They're emotionally dead. They've shut down, and we have to close down their business because they've given it all and it hasn't worked out because they've lost balance. It always comes back, as you know, in your own life. Balance is a hard thing we try to do. We're never achieving perfect equilibrium. It's going a little more this way. You try to write it back this way. And again, it comes down to your expectation. And I'll give you the expectation issue. So many of the people I work with, their expectations that owning a business were never reasonable in the first place. And I'll give you a common daily occurrence that we all experience. You have to be at your dentist at 10 a.m. You know it takes 20 minutes to get there, but you leave it 15 minutes before. So you, and then that guy who's slow and now you got stuck behind him on a red light, you're mad. You're cursing that person in your mind. But if you'd ever look back, that was an unreasonable expectation to expect to get there in 15 minutes, what takes 20. And then you're taking that anger on someone else when it's really yourself. Well, same with these business owners that don't have reasonable expectations. And why are they unreasonable? Generally, they haven't done their homework. Oh, my friend over there's got a business. He or she's making a lot of money, or so they perceive. Or they've taken another vacation, or they live in a nicer house. Well, there's a reason that happened, but they don't usually drill down to find out how they got to where they are. They just want to have a business because it sounds good. And many times, one spouse will want what we call a hobby business. Just probably the best example is realtors. Everyone knows realtors. Probably in your family, your friends has a realtor. But you know, 80% of most real estate sales are done by 20% of the realtors. A lot of people hold themselves as realtors, they do 1 or 2, 3 closings a year. Why? Because they don't have the ability or the drive or the discipline to stay at it consistently. They want to work at it when they feel like it. And we know that doesn't, well, you can do it if you can afford it, but in the long run, that's not going to get you what you want if, in fact, you want a successful, profitable business. And then the ego issue again. I've come to the conclusion, I think you'll agree, some people are just not cut out to be business owners. It's not what they want. Or they don't have that, whatever it takes, that special ingredient, that drive, and that discipline. But they don't know that. So when they start a business and it doesn't work out, they're going like this. It's not their fault. Well, usually when you and I start pointing fingers, it really is coming right back to ourselves, you know. What? Because I don't want to admit it. It can't be me, you know. It's got to be something else. All right, now, through time, again, here's how, as we get older, I believe most of us have a better control over our ego, our sense of self-confidence. And like this young man indicated earlier, we all have a side of us. There's nobody more critical about you than yourself. And we got to make sure we don't let that side beat us up too much, because it'll paralyze. It'll stop us from achieving more in life than we're allowed to. And if we listen to that voice too much, it's just negative. It doesn't help us. We got to have some self-criticism to keep us grounded, keep us in touch with reality. Well, my point is, as we get older, the enthusiasm and the ego I used to have, because when I got out of law school, I was going to change the world. I wasn't going to be a bankruptcy lawyer. That was the last thing on my mind. In fact, I didn't even take bankruptcy in law school because that was a third-year elective, and that was a hard course. And by third year, I was already out the door mentally. So what happened? Well, out of my own arrogance and ego at 25, 26, I built my business out of nothing. But now that I'm older, you're wiser. You've been ground down. Like this young man right now, I view people like blocks of granite. He's still got sharp edges. I'm rounded. I'm almost a boulder now, you know. You know, raising children, working on your marriage, dealing with folks every day, and trying to solve problems, both for other people and your own. Well, Kirk, aren't you getting more and more boulder-like?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I'm like a rock that's been on the beach for like a million years.
Oh, now you're shiny.
It's like glass. I
Yeah.
like that.
And then our esteemed cameraman, Zach, he's still uncut. Yeah. Right. Yeah, no. All right, now, and again, I just want to put a final touch on this. It's taken me a long time to learn this, and I know you guys have gone through it. Probably, hopefully you've learned it sooner than I did. All this effort you put in your life, building up a business, being successful, whatever you perceive that to be, is really for naught if we don't maintain and achieve balance in our life, in our personal life, in our business life. And that's been probably my biggest struggle over the last 40 years. Because being what you call a workaholic, trouble with being a workaholic is it's socially acceptable, but it's still too extreme. And I've had to tamp that down. And Tom, my friend, will give me crud about working on the weekends. And I'm doing better about stopping that.
Actually, it doesn't work. He just goes to the office and takes naps.
Well,
Get away.
well, getting away from the family and taking a nap helps. But the point is, maintaining boundaries in one's life, I think, is a lifelong struggle for most of us. How do we enjoy our personal life and still have a good life in business? And so the most important thing is we have to maintain and guard against our ego getting out of control. So that's why an outsized ego is never our amigo. And that's all I have to say.
It's very good.
Yeah.
I got a question though, Noel. You know, when people are the ego, when you see them, when you're trying to walk them off the cliff and all that, and they still, from what I see, they still treat people like dirt. I mean, saying, hey, I'm the boss, this is what you're gonna do, and this is my company, and they still ride this thing and say, and they don't taper back and say, hey,
how can I need help. They don't even say that. I'm still in control.
Well, part of it is, I would say, what is the structure? Is it still hierarchical? One of the, military is the ultimate example. But if you are in a large organization, Boeing, Weyerhaeuser, or state or city government, how do I say this politely, which is not my normal style? Certain organizations attract certain personalities. If I am a little Hitler, or if structure is really important for me, I'm not going to want to go to a free-flowing organization where I feel like I don't know where my boundaries are. Other people like that. So I would say it attracts personalities that enhance the rigidity of that hierarchical organization. That's the best way I would. I mean, Travis, isn't that your experience?
Yeah. You attract what you are. So, like the point I made the other day was the reason the military loses a lot of good people is because of that rigid, which is in contrast with the Israeli military is more
horizontal,
naturally,
more collaborative,
has to be.
smaller units,
Yep.
and well, we know this. I was in the military. Most of us were here. Sergeants they're the backbone of the Army. Master sergeants, they know more than, second Louis is worthless in a tight time. And a good second lieutenant will defer to a master sergeant.
Absolutely.
Did the Israeli military evolve that way because of the hostile area that they live in?
Right,
They
right.
have to
The level
empower
of
their people.
innovation, yep, and to that point, Kurt, like that over there, there is in this book I read called Startup Nation. They talk about the lowest private being able to go up to a general and just being like, man, that was stupid. That last mission was just ridiculous, and they just have no problem. And so this startup culture has developed over there because people are just they've got enough gall to challenge the structure.
I wouldn't even call it gall. They're encouraged to do it, and they know there won't be a negative retribution. Right. And that would make you want to be more proactive. And we know that when you're in an organization where you feel like you're not valued, you feel like you're stifled, then it doesn't bode well for you or for the organization. And they lose the innovativeness or new ideas that you might have. And again, if you have somebody in a position of authority who's threatened by new ideas or somebody challenging them, it's in the long run bad. John, you in the military, you know all about that. You had units that worked because your leaders encouraged that. Then other leaders probably didn't feel comfortable. Yeah.
So can you tell me, share with us about when you do your bankruptcy, as far as the demographics, what kind of age group are we talking about that have a hard time? The older, the 50s, 60s, 70s generation versus the 80s, 90s generation?
That's a good question, Tom, and the issue is, yes, I find the older, if they're over 50, especially 60s, 70s, 80s, I get a lot of grandparents who, because of an accident, didn't have enough insurance or a medical trauma, and they rack up a couple $100,000. The medical bankruptcies are overstated. I haven't found to be a lot of them, but what I find is older people, it's anathema to them to even consider bankruptcy. Their children are dragging them in there, or the relatives or a friend saying you got to because you can't afford it. They're garnishing or they're going to repossess. So they're forced, and that's the only way they'll do it. And they'll spend a lot of time telling me that I can't stand this. The younger generation is less of a stigma. And I would say I started doing bankruptcies in 1977. And so I would say that the difference is the younger generation, it's not that they want to do it, not that they enjoy it. Nobody in their right mind wants to do it. It's like, I'm like a dentist of the legal industry. They're only there because they're toothache or they have an abscess. But it's easier for them to do that and more socially acceptable.
Do you know if there's any, sorry.
Yeah. Good, yeah.
Do you know if there's any truth to that, the zip code in Canterwood had the highest foreclosure in the state of Washington than any other?
I don't know that. It probably wouldn't surprise you just because the mortgage payments out there are so high. So many of the folks I run into, this is where the ego comes in, they're bound up by image. I work with a lot of professionals, doctors and lawyers and elected officials, former professional athletes I work with who you would know, and they got caught up in the house and all this other stuff. And then when the music stops, they're like anyone else. They're very ashamed. They're very afraid, and they wait to the last minute. I'm working with a fellow now who you don't know, a well-known public figure in the Puget Sound area, had a successful business in the Puget Sound area for 28 years. He came to see me one month when he couldn't make payroll. Well, maybe if he'd see me 6 months or a year earlier, but they're so, and what happens is they become so isolated, they don't even want to tell their spouse because you're ashamed, you're scared. Let's face it, when it comes to money, money is a form of power. Power is an issue in every relationship. And people will tell you anything they want about your life, strangers, except how much money they make, except how they're doing. Well, how you doing? I'm doing great. But they don't want you to know what they're making. And so my point is, the folks, when it comes to money, are very slow in ever dealing with it. They just don't know what to do. And most of the business owners I represent, they and their wife or their husband, they've stopped talking. They come into my office and there's so much hostility, and they're sitting there and the body language alone tells you they're beyond communicating. So what you have to do is, in your own way, get them to lance the boil, get the poison out, so that we can actually start moving ahead and figure out what we can do. And also they might leave laughing instead of killing each other.
You're also marriage counselor.
Yeah,
Yes.
right.
So no, one of the things that I'm fascinated by, especially doing personal development, I always say I'm in the change business, is like what gets that person to a place where they're ready to like fully confront themselves, in whatever realm of life it is, whether it be their health, finances, so on and so forth. Like, in your opinion, I mean, I know we've talked about a lot of things today, but like, is there, what makes that switch click?
You mean where they finally want to do something about it?
Yeah, like what makes a person, like, in your opinion?
Well, that's,
Because maybe not the person who's like about to fall off a cliff, but
Right.
like they're emergent at that point. Is there something that you've seen where a person before they get to that point are like, you know what?
again, I look at life this way. We're all fighting fear in life. I'm always telling myself, if I can get the fear out of this problem, I can deal with it better. And so what I've learned is it's how well developed are people's mechanics or personal thinking habits so that they can deal with it sooner. Think of your classmates, people you've known in life who just don't do well. They don't do well in life because they don't know how to respond in time, I guess you want to call it. They wait to the last minute because as they're younger, I've learned this, as I view people, and I've been a Boy Scout leader and I've seen a lot of kids in sports. Some kids, if they avoid a problem, then that reinforces their thinking, well, I can try to avoid dealing with it instead of confronting it early on. And we've all avoided stuff. Procrastination may have been an issue in my life. It still is. As I'm reminded daily by my wife, Lori. So there is no one point, Travis. My response to you would be, it depends on the development of that individual's ability to handle stress and problems. And your job is to get them to do a better job early in life and and when I tell everyone who comes to my office, I say, I'm here to get the fear out of your life. What are you afraid of? And many times that's the first time one spouse has said it in front of the other spouse. Even though it's that 800-pound gorilla or elephant in your room, everyone knows what it is, but I don't know.
It's not there.
We're not talking about it, Young man, you haven't said anything. You have any questions?
No, just soaking it all in.
You're not fear-based.
No.
You're not going to wait till the last minute.
No.
So Noel, what's I guess the question is always parallels the questions that people who are like first responders and police officers. How do you separate your work into your regular life? Because you see this and you're maybe one client away from being homeless or whatever, or the cop might be one shift away from not coming home. How do you separate that? How do you get confidence to go, I'm going to go forward?
It's a good question. I think it's, again, I'm that bolder now. When I remember in my 20s and 30s, I'd come home all excited thinking about the latest problem. Because as you know, in your daily life, every day you learn something somebody did in a paper or maybe a friend you heard. You're thinking, who would do that? How crazy is that? Every day somebody does something you would never think of. If we were sitting down right now for 5 hours trying to write up a script, we couldn't think of the stuff we read about or hear about, right? Well, when I was young, I thought it was all exciting. Now, when I go home, I hardly think about it. Maybe I've just gotten numb or less caring. I don't know. But I can't afford to take what's left of my energy and dwell on it. I'd much rather talk about our kids or our sports team or things like that. I mean, I click it off pretty easily. In fact, before I'm out the door, with exceptional cases. And also, after 5,000 cases, there's a trend in everything you see. In my line of work, just like with you, you cannot connect with somebody unless you let them tell their story. Even though you know already what's going to be said, when a guy comes into my office and says, my partner, I already know what's happened, you know. But they have to emote, they have to basically bleed on your table for an hour, and only then, we're all the same. We don't feel comfortable unless we feel like someone's listened to our story. So that takes up most of my listening to the story, and then answering appropriately, and biting my tongue. I mean, sometimes I have to excuse myself and go downstairs and maybe laugh. And then I come back up and sit down. Yes, you were saying, you know, because you feel like saying some days, are you serious? You did what? You know.
I like something you said earlier on people perceive you have your business all. You control your time.
Right.
You have everything. And when I was just starting out, going back to visiting my staff, my prior staff, they're like, what are you doing here? Are you working? Yeah, I'm working. So when do you take off? I'm off. So they can understand it. You're on and off simultaneously all the time, basically.
Well, that's why very few people own a business, because most people want that. Let's face it, there are times I wish I had a job where maybe I was a waiter, a wait staff. When I'm done, I don't worry about the overhead of the restaurant or anything else. What am I making tips today, and when's my next shift? Well, then your brain is free to concentrate on your personal life. So most people are more interested in structure, and then they're out of there. And so when you go beyond that 40 hours or whatever it is, it doesn't compute to them. That's why there was surprise, I suspect.
Well, I try structuring so much because I like structure also. But I spend so much time wrestling and trying to fit it into work time, non-work time. So now it's like, you know, it all blends in. And it's made it a lot easier in a sense.
Right. Well, and that's the problem with owning your business is your structure, or excuse me, there's no structure. Your business will consume all your time unless you force yourself to have discipline.
Well, that's the thing. There we go again, because you're like time off is like and whatever it is, it's just an extension of you. Because it's like we talked about this before. No, you fast, you feast or famine type of thing. Like right now, I might have to fly down to LA next week because they got projects. I'm like, okay, I'm going because that's money. You know, it's just like you just don't get, oh, not yet, because, you know, we got to wait. It doesn't work that way.
Well,
It's hard.
Yeah, and also blending into, you know, learning to, it's not always 7 to 5 or 9 to 5, whatever.
Right.
Is, hey, the weather's good. You know what? I'm going paddling at 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
But I may have to make it up. So tonight, I'm probably going to work a little later doing other things. So I balance it. And then some of the structure I've tried building in is I reserve my Saturday and Sundays very selective of which weekends I will work. And I'll try not, I'll receive it, I might read your emails, but after 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, I'm not replying.
Yeah, right, exactly.
You know, so little things like that have been very, but it's been a process of evolving.
Yeah, so entrepreneurship is kind of funny because it's not like everybody is so used to, hey, I work from 8 to 5 and that's it. It's just like, man, opportunity comes, you grab it, strike when the iron's hot.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the world that I wish, you know, entrepreneurs or business owners realize before they even get themselves in it. Because it's like, you know, you might have to miss your kid's baseball game because you got to get that job.
And the last thought I like to leave with you folks is this is when my ego or your ego is just not in sync, and it's not within fair boundaries, I think, or productive for your life. And that is when we get to the point where we're afraid of being found out because we'll look bad. And it goes on, and there are simple things every day, like, was I right or wrong on that issue? I don't like being made fun of because, am I going to look silly or stupid? I've learned you got to let yourself down and be seen for what you are. The hard thing I had to learn in life is if you let people see you for what you really are, you'll actually attract more people into your life than trying to be something you're really not. Or insisting I'm right. Always insisting you're right is just doomed to fail, and it's going to drive people away from you. Acknowledge when you may not be right or not right and move on. But that's where the ego's outsized, and it needs to be reined in or chipped away. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent.